Hi, Paul Sakis. Good News Plan. I'm speaking to Augusto Lopez-Claros. Hi, good morning. How are you?
Good morning, Paul. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. We're going to talk about a book that you've created, Global Governance and the Emergence of
Global Institutions for the 21st Century.
Global Institutions for the 21st Century. Okay. We don't have global institutions for the 21st century now, or we're going to maybe see them in a different way? What's going to happen, do you see?
Well, we do have some institutions that are multilateral and that bring together, member countries in a spirit of cooperation. Perhaps the one that is most well known to people are the United Nations, which were very much an American creation. Franklin Roosevelt in 1945, together with Winston Churchill and those countries that were the allies in the war effort against the Nazis, created the United Nations. The spirit of that initiative was essentially to create a context for peace and security, bring nations together to essentially collaborate and set a basis for peace and prosperity in the future. When the United Nations was created, soon thereafter, we saw the emergence of a few other supporting institutions, some of which have been in the news, in recent months and decades, like the World Health Organization, UNESCO, the World Bank, and the IMF, which actually came into being in 1944. But the reason we wrote this book is because there is a sense that this framework of multilateral institutions that we have today in 2020 is not very effective anymore for addressing the problems that we face today. Climate change, nuclear proliferation, income inequality, the persistence of extreme poverty. We are confronting critical global problems, the solution to which requires strengthened international cooperation. And unfortunately, this is not happening in the context of the UN system that we have today. And so our book, in addition to making a diagnosis of some of the problems that we face, also offers some proposals, some ways in which we could strengthen this multilateral system to make it more effective, to make it fit for purpose, to empower it, to actually help us find solutions to problems like climate change and the other global challenges that we face.
Okay, so give us, and I'll just let you know that we have been very involved with the UN for many, many years. And I have been the producer of the International Day of Peace, September 21st event, Central Park and Times Square. We're virtual this year. We helped create the International Day of Water with the United Nations. My buddy Phil Sowers, World Water Rescue Foundation in the country of Tajikistan. I've rung the bell over there of peace many, many a time with John McConnell, who started Earth Day. And later on with Dennis Hayes, that whole outreach. And I've been involved with environmental issues for a long time. I started Nature Series. So you're talking to somebody who's into understanding some aspects of the United Nations. I never joined as an NGO. I've always been an outside involved concerned corporation, my company, Good News Corporation. So I have a little background on this. Now, as far as the UN aspect of it. But I'm very interested because this is a very important subject to me. And we're all about the hug of planets. We're all about one world. I'm a John Lennonist. I'm actually a one world guy. And how can we, what kind of, and business is always part of peace. You can't have peace without, one of my vice presidents of Merrill Lynch says, you don't bomb your neighbors, you don't bomb your consumers. And so this is important to me. What ways can we live a better life to move forward? What did you come up with? What were some good ideas? And and are they real?
Okay, all right. You know that most people think of 1945 and the conference in San Francisco as the sort of the start date for the United Nations. But in fact, in 1945, what happened is that the UN Charter was adopted by 51 nations. And the UN Charter is a little bit like the US Constitution, right? It's the founding document of the United Nations, which lays out the principles in which the organization will operate. However, the UN was actually created by Roosevelt and Churchill and a few others among the allies in 1942. Now, what is really interesting
Taiwan, in the Flushing Meadow Park, I believe.
Well, it was essentially a response to the ongoing war effort. It happened soon after the United States was attacked by the Japanese in Pearl Harbor. I think that's what led Roosevelt to basically say, at the end of this war, which we will win, we need to set up an organization that will help us prevent the next war, right? And so in those early years, 1942, 1943, when they were thinking, what kind of a UN organization do we want? They had some very interesting, fairly ambitious, and I think practical ideas. And one of them was to essentially go back to the United States Constitutional Convention of 1787, which brought the colonies together, and create a legislature, a legislative body that would be able to pass law that would be binding on its member countries. Right? In other words, the original conception for the United Nations was to have a General Assembly that would actually be given jurisdiction to, in limited areas of international law, and that these laws would actually lead to obligations on the part of the member countries. Unfortunately, that vision was later on in 1944 and leading up to the San Francisco conference was seen to be unrealistic. And what came out of San Francisco and the UN Charter was a much more limited organization, much more narrowly defined, and of course with the veto power given to the permanent members, the United States, the Soviet Union, France, England, and so on. And what that has hampered the development of the United Nations. It has greatly limited its ability to do more for the world. So in our book, we have two kinds of proposals. We have certain proposals which I think can be implemented in the short term, simply with a little bit of political will. They don't require amendment of the UN Charter, which is a very high bar. Things like, for instance, to answer directly your question, creating a second chamber attached to the General Assembly called a World Parliamentary Assembly. This would be made up of parliamentarians from the member countries. It would strengthen the democratic legitimacy of the United Nations system. At the moment, that legitimacy is very weak because the people who sit on the General Assembly on the principle of one country, one vote, are representing essentially the party in power. In the case of China, they represent the Chinese Communist Party. There is very little connection between the UN and the people that the UN is supposed to represent and whose rights it is supposed to defend and so on. If you were to establish a body that established that connection by bringing in parliamentarians from the member countries, you would have an advisory mechanism that would begin to consult and make deliberations and make recommendations on issues like human rights, the environment, climate change, and so on. We have proposals that can seek to strengthen the financial sort of resources of the United Nations. The United Nations at the moment is a body that is very poorly financed. It has a system that is very complicated and that essentially has left the organization very starved of resources and therefore unable to do things like climate change mitigation, which is going to require a global effort on the part of all the UN members. And so in the book, we have specific proposals that would try to establish a more solid financial basis for the United Nations as a way of empowering the organization to do more. And then in a kind of a longer term framework, we have other proposals. We think that some of the early criticism of the way the UN was organized by establishing one country, one vote in the General Assembly, which means that China, with a population of 1.4 billion people, has the same voting power as the island of Nauru with a population of 12,000 people. We think that the General Assembly should move to a system of weighted voting, where the number of votes that you get, the voting power that you get, is linked to some kind of objective criteria: economic size, population size, some way that essentially delivers a distribution of political power that is more realistic than simply one country, one vote, which just doesn't work. It's not credible. And if you do that, then you can consider giving the General Assembly in some narrow areas, essentially peace and security and the environment, some legislative capacity, the ability to pass international law, which then would be binding on member countries. To do that, you need to amend the UN Charter. Therefore, it's not something that is going to happen soon, but it is something that I think can be realistically considered in a medium-term framework. I just want to add that this book, the timing of the publication was intended to coincide with the 75th anniversary of the UN Charter, which is 2020. And so our book has been generating quite a bit of debate. We have participated in multiple presentations at the UN and in other fora, because we think that we need to begin thinking about what kind of United Nations do we want to have in its 100th anniversary, right? 2045. We have 25 years ahead of us. Unless we take action, unless we modernize it, unless we bring the Charter to the 21st century, then the UN will become increasingly marginalized. And as a result of that, we will all suffer, because in the absence of a powerful mechanism of international cooperation, all the problems that we face today, beginning with climate change, are not going to be addressed. At the moment, the way we are confronting climate change, which is through the Paris Agreement of 2015, is not working. I am a great supporter of the Paris Agreement. I think it was a very important moment in 2015 because the countries recognized we have a serious problems, we have to work together. But it's not working in the sense that emissions have continued to rise. The commitments made by countries are completely voluntary, they are non-binding. And in the absence of a different system, what is going to happen is that climate change is going to accelerate, right? And that is going to bring huge costs for humanity, a great deal of suffering and disruption. And we must not let that happen. And the only way to prevent that from happening is to strengthen the UN system in fairly important ways. And the window of opportunity that we have is maybe the next 10 years, at most. It's not the next 25 years. It's really the next 10 years, especially on the climate change side. So this is a very critical moment in the history of mankind. And I think that all of us, governments, the business community, civil society, people like you and me, we should be focusing our attention on what we can do to strengthen the UN system and to bring it into the 21st century, which is not.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you very much. And congratulations. It is very important work. I'm a believer that in the UN. So, and that there is already an organization. That's why I've been doing since 2002, the International Day of Peace, which has been around since 1984. And so, but got reinvigorated in 2002. And so, because it is in my estimation, our only world body for, the 193 countries, and with hopefully more of an understanding that there are other countries, there are other people that aren't involved, that haven't even been allowed in to be a member of the UN. And it sure it sure would be great if there would be more a harmonious situation there. And I think it also carries over to the country. I mean, I don't think it always, they can raise their hand at the United Nations. Look, we have the international, so I'm possessed with the International Day of Peace. I spent my money and everything, my company's efforts to promote this one day. I always say on the stage, and I'm the host, I say, you know, we have this, let's see how we can, you know, get more peace on Mother Earth. We have these Hug the Planets. We do a whole big show. And make that the first day for the rest of our life, the World Peace Day. And, you know, every week I was supposed to do the International Day of Conscience on April 5th, or I produced it in Times Square. And I think it was just, I just did a show. I was on the show, International Day of Tolerance on Monday. So they have all these good, you know, loving, caring, kind, heartful scenarios. The question I always wonder, though, you know, it's a group. And this group is the do-gooders. I'm going to put them under, okay? We're good news. But somehow are the do-gooders able to translate it into their own country? Not that they're not do-gooders there. I don't think it gets its due, its respect worldwide. Their efforts there at the United Nations then gets carried through with the administrations. Once again, I'm a John Leninist, so I don't even believe in countries, but that's a different story. I don't think it gets carried on. So why doesn't everybody on the International Day of Peace in every country in the world, something major, little minor things happen, this group cares about it and they'll do a little something, they'll take a moment of silence at 12 noon, which is the request of the United Nations, a global truce. Listen to those words, global truce. Every one of those days, tolerance, global happiness day. I've made 50 shows. It doesn't translate. So there's some missing thing. Either some very wealthy kids are getting to be ambassadors, and it's a party scenario or not a party scenario. I'm not trying to put it down. That's why I never became an NGO, because I didn't want to be then in the middle. I like an outside opinion. I like the Ted Turner who gave $1 billion to the foundation. I know a lot about this, but that's what I personally think is the most important thing for the UN to overcome. Its lack of respect in its own countries, in my mind, that what is these important scenarios that they do, which I bless them for, does not then happen in their countries. A day of tolerance, a day of happiness, all these days, the Day of Peace, are the actions there. I got the peacekeepers, the United Nations peacekeepers in my movie for Woodstock Forever. I did Woodstock, the 20th anniversary of it. And they're around the United Nations. Who? The United Nations peacekeepers. They have peacekeepers. They have guys that go into the wars and die. It's not, or either they need a good marketing job, which I think most of scenarios of good work need, because it doesn't hit the front page. I dedicated 22 years of my life to good news broadcasts to promote the good in the world. And maybe that's all it needs, because it seems marketing is a lot of, you know, maybe we need a better social networking outreach for the UN's actions within their own countries, but it needs a bigger bite.
Right. Yeah, you know, we together with my two co-authors and other collaborators, including people like Amanda Ellis, who is the former New Zealand ambassador to the Security Council, we have set up an organization called the Global Governance Forum. I would invite your listeners to go to globalgovernanceforum.org, and you will see that we are actually trying to reach out to young people, to women, you know, to people of all stripes, with the ideas of this book, because we need to have much more engagement of civil society and the business community. You know, diplomacy, Paul, until about 30 years ago, used to be essentially something that was led by governments. You know, it was like an official sort of activity. But in the last 20, 30 years, most of the major initiatives of international cooperation, the creation of International Criminal Court, the campaign to ban landmines, the Treaty on the Elimination of Nuclear Weapons of 2017, the Paris Agreement on Climate Change, all of these initiatives would not have happened without the strong support of civil society organizations. In many of these cases, they led the effort. They drafted the treaties, and then they went after Canada or New Zealand or Norway, some well-meaning government, you know, to get their support and to use them so that they could create a coalition of other states. And so I think that the work that you are doing through your radio is vital, is very, very important, because it can contribute to raise awareness beyond simply governments. The future is in our hands, really. It's not amending the UN Charter when it eventually happens, because I firmly believe that it will, is not going to be an initiative of governments. They have a vested interest in the status quo. It will happen when people like you and me, the business community, civil society, academics, and young people especially, begin to go out into the streets and make the case that our current global order is not working. It is not working. It is not delivering solutions to the problems that we face. And because of this, the longer we wait, the greater the risk that we will face global catastrophic risks, and that we will have untold suffering for humanity. And we must avoid that at all costs. We must work to prevent that from happening.
Okay. Augusto, thank you so much for your thoughts. I'm going to ask you one last question that I ask many people. I'll even say, I like star power. I use star power. I start my show with Michael Douglas, and I have Stevie Wonder in there, and I got Shakira, and I got the Paul McCartneys, Ringo Starr, who gets up, and all these people who are speaking for world peace, saying, you know, this is peace to me. I'm going to send you don't know about my show. I send it to, landmines, Paul McCartney. I mean, you know, these guys, these people, somehow we got to tighten it up. I agree with you. We are one, you know, I work off of this, you know, this is my, my planet. All right. This is your planet, my planet. This is everyone's planet, but on my planet, there are no countries. So I personally wonder, and we can talk at another moment, but is there a better way to run this place? And, you know, I wonder, because there's no planet and there's no color of any person's face or anything. What do you think?
I totally agree with you. I totally agree with you. And what I'd like to share with you is a quote, which I think encapsulates perfectly what you have just said. Right? This was said by the founder of the Baha'i community in the 19th century. He said, "The earth is but one country, and mankind its citizens." I think the time has come when we have to recognize our oneness. You know, we are members of one human race. We have, our history is a history of making too much of differences of the color of our skin, differences of our economic status, differences of nationality, and all those things have to be swept away, and we have to be thinking of all of us as members of one human family. The earth is but one country, and mankind its citizens.
Yeah, we need some, I'm with you, it's the Native Americans conversation as well, that quote. You know, we're here, we're just borrowing the stuff. It's not our ownership, you know, and so many wars have been fought over these borders and boundaries and the lack of this, and it's ridiculous. It's I'm into it's a mismanaged planet worldwide. So it does need help. It needs, and it can be done. It's the craziest thing. It can be done. But it usually takes a very, 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 I've said, you know, let the Gandhis, let the Mother Teresa's, let somebody run this place, you know, in a different manner and different mindset. I don't know, but I applaud you on what you do. My last question, because I ask people based upon the International Day, what does peace mean to you? Augusto, what does peace mean to you? What is peace for you?
I think peace means essentially recognizing the unity of mankind. I think that what has led to war in the past is that we have seen each other as members of different tribes, as opponents, as being essentially on different sides of the divide, right? I think that, Paul, you will agree with me if I were to say that God has created no borders between France and Germany, right? And yet France and Germany, until they created the European Union, had fought countless wars over the last several centuries. I think that peace is the moment when we finally realize that the earth is one country and that we are all members of the same human race.
Well, I love it. All right, thanks, my friend. Appreciate the conversation. We'll speak again.
Thank you, Paul.